today we are talking about one of my favorite topics, women's health. Funding for women's health is up. The taboos around perimenopause, menopause, women's sexual health are finally lifting, and there is more content out there than ever before on any women's health topic. But the women at the center of this are unusually informed and unusually skeptical for good reason. She's done the research. She's been dismissed, typically dismissed by the medical system, and she doesn't buy into vague claims made by brands. And interestingly enough, the brands winning in this category aren't the ones with the loudest marketing. They are the ones that actually understand the science of what they are selling. They understand the biology, the consumer, and the problem she is trying to solve. And today we've brought together three amazing people in three of the most complex subcategories in women's health: hormonal health, fertility, and perimenopause. And quick housekeeping before we start. If you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box of Zoom, and we'll get to as many as we can in our Q&A at the end. So please don't hold back. And in case you don't know who I am, my name is Susanne Mitschke. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Citruslabs. Citruslabs is the leading provider of decentralized clinical studies for consumer brands. And my background is in public health, with a special interest in women's health. I am a certified principal investigator and have led several clinical studies on the women's health front from PMS to menopause. All right, so the reason why you are all here, let me bring in our three guests, and let them quickly introduce themselves, beginning with Thara. Thara, you are a naturopathic doctor with something like 10,000 of clinical hours in women's health, and you personally formulated Hey Freya's flagship product. Please introduce yourself and Hey Freya, and tell everyone what made you jump from your practice to building a company.
Absolutely. So my name is Dr. Thara Vayali, and I am a naturopathic physician, which sometimes people are confused about exactly what that is. With proper training, so when you're from accredited colleges, what that is it's very similar to what a PCP would offer, but we have additional training in herbal medicine, acupuncture. We learn a lot more about nutritional needs and how to support that, but not just in a nutritional aspect, but also from helping with wellness, not just deficiencies. And so that's my practice. I've been practicing for over 15 years. My practice has primarily been women between the ages of 30 to 60. That's kind of the bulk of women that are now being targeted in this women's health space in a brand's world. And what brought me into building Hey Freya was really this: when in practice, you're seeing people one by one. And what I notice is in many of my clinical sessions, a big chunk of that time is spent on education and the very first steps that are very common between patients. And so when I started to see repeatable models, I started to see the ability to scale something and give better access to women to the initial information around their health and their hormones, so that they didn't have to necessarily book an appointment and have the long tail of trying to understand their bodies in this one-on-one session, and instead have access to better healthcare earlier through scaled information and access to tests before they have to go down the individualized route. And so that's where Hey Freya came to be, of this ability to scale the knowledge that was repeatable. And then the group of people that I work with, it's the primary causes often within the hormonal space, but primarily within the adrenal system. So you're looking at not just estrogen and progesterone, but also
Mhm.
cortisol and the signaling along there. And so the uniqueness of that wasn't being spoken about.
Amazing. Raegen, WeNatal did something almost no one in fertility had done before. You put men in the conversation. And can you please introduce yourself and WeNatal and tell us how you ended up as the dietitian voice behind WeNatal?
Absolutely. Very honored to be here and be invited to speak on behalf of WeNatal. My name is Raegen Barger, and I am a registered dietitian with a background and board certification in integrative and functional nutrition. I lead content and education here at WeNatal, and my role is really to try to help bridge what research is saying and the real questions that couples and individuals are asking during the preconception phase on through pregnancy and postpartum, and even now beyond that period. So WeNatal is the first prenatal company to focus on supporting both partners and formulating a prenatal or fertility supplement specifically geared toward men. And it's what initially drew me to the brand, that willingness to really have a more complete conversation around fertility. We not only speak to women, but treating or just treating fertility as kind of this 9 month period of time. But we really want to look at both partners along the way and the months leading up to preconception, on through postpartum recovery, and then their long term health. So, as one of the dietitian voices behind the brand, my role is really extends beyond content writing, but also how can we translate complex nutrition science into education that is useful, very supportive, but also realistic for people to implement. So I work closely with Ronit and Vita, our founders, our clinical advisors, but also our product and nutrition teams, as well as marketing, to make sure our messaging stays very evidence informed, but also highly relatable. So my goal is always to have our customers feel very empowered and informed, but not overwhelmed by them feeling like they have to do everything perfectly along the way. So we're big on consistency over perfection.
And thank you very much, Reagan. And last but certainly not least, Alexander. Alexander, perimenopause is having a huge cultural moment right now, and the company you're building, meno, is right in the middle of it. Can you please introduce yourself and also meno and tell us what pulled you into a category that most brands avoided until about like 2 years ago?
Yeah, of course. I'm Alexander DiPersia. I am the co-founder of Elemento. We are pre-launch still, so we're coming soon, hopefully in the next 2 months, early fall. Elemento came from a personal place for me. I've gone through a lot of physical problems in my life. I'm a sufferer of FBS, which is a terrible technical term for failed back surgery. I've had multiple spinal fusions, a lot of pain, a lot of inflammation, and I was always interested in researching how I can limit my inflammation, limit my pain. It led me to reading a lot about sugar, reading a lot about sugar, reading a lot of clinical trials. Where the clinical trials led eventually was to insulin resistance. And I kept seeing perimenopause pop up over and over and over again. I knew about perimenopause. I wasn't very deep, very knowledgeable as much as people are now, though there is still some confusion, as you know. And we kind of reverse engineered what we were looking at through my personal research and realized this is a vastly, vastly underserved category. And the research that we had done in regards to inflammation, insulin resistance was something that was very applicable to the perimenopause space. And started to dig deeper, started to speak to my mother, to my friends, to my sister-in-law, to everybody that I knew, every woman, my doctors, and every story was a bit different. What is perimenopause versus menopause? How do we discuss this? And it seemed that while, as you said, it's having a cultural moment, perimenopause. that means there's a lot of content, there's a lot of information, and that information can be super helpful, but it can also be very confusing. It can also be very overwhelming. Um, and we're trying to cut through that part of it, trying to make it as clear as possible and to meet consumers where they're at. So in building this, it's been well over a year. Our initial launch, our formulas have locked for nearly a year. We've realized that we don't want to hop in and just throw our name on something to address a cool category, a zeitgeisty category. We want to make a legitimate difference, and that starts with what we're bringing in the fall. And we hope we're going to meet consumers where they're at, each one, whether their knowledge is vast and well researched, whether it's new to them, whether they're still struggling between that difference of perimenopause and menopause, and address real issues, not just buzzwords.
Fantastic. And it's great to have all three of you here. And what I love about this lineup is that you are each in a very different category of women's health, and it shows how much breadth there really is. And, you already mentioned it, Alexander, that, we are drowning in information, right? And sometimes even in misinformation. There's TikTok, there's Instagram, then on TikTok, there are these TikTok categories, wellness influencers, there's Reddit, supplement ads. So I want to start by asking you about the single biggest myth in your area. Sarah, let's start with you. Cortisol specifically, right? Cortisol's everywhere. Cortisol tests popping up. There are, things like cortisol face, cortisol belly. You mentioned adrenal fatigue. It's all over social media. And as someone who has actually treated thousands of women, what is the internet getting wrong about cortisol and stress right now?
I think first I'll just say anything that has that peak moment, whether the Google searches for it are very high, or Instagram is now saying everybody has cortisol belly. I think the biggest piece to recognize is that it's a signal that women are suffering and there is no solution. So the market floods. Because if there's no solution being provided from a larger kind of trusted body, it's very easy then for people to say, well, let's come up with terms, let's come up with things that address those women's problems. And so just to name that, even what I'm about to say, it's also that the reality is women are suffering. There's a lot of and a lot of confusion, and it's very easy in those spaces when people are vulnerable for a lot of solutions to pop up, and framing and naming, even the word in the term of perimenopause. There's a lot of framing and naming just to give people validation. That being said, one of the biggest things that I think is a myth that we are hoping to be part of the busting of is that cortisol is a single measure. Is that, oh, my cortisol is high? Just the language of is, versus the idea that it actually has a rhythm in your body. That's something that hasn't yet caught on, that this is not a single piece of information that you're looking for. You're looking for what your pattern is and your rhythm over a day. It should be high and low at different times. And the other piece is that regardless of whether it's a single point or not, that high cortisol is the problem. And what we have seen over hundreds of tests is that we have a bigger, I would call it almost an epidemic of lowered blunted cortisol in this age group of women, the ones that are facing perimenopause. So what they're dealing with is not necessarily what is being pitched to them. And so the biggest myth of high cortisol, and cortisol on its own.
That's very interesting. It reminds me a little bit about the CGM kind of controversy, right? Where you have like glucose spikes, but this is actually just how your body reacts, right? A glucose spike doesn't mean that you actually have diabetes. It just means that your body might, just normally react to a banana or
Yes.
berries, right?
Yes,
Very
exactly.
interesting.
You're having, and so what you want to know is the response actually appropriate to the situation?
Yeah. And Reagan, you know, the most persistent myth in fertility, I think, is that it's a women's issue. But I read that men contribute to roughly half of all infertility cases. And I have so many questions around this alone. But what was the hard part in bringing men into the fertility conversation as kind of as a brand? Was it the science, or was it convincing men to actually take a supplement for fertility?
Yeah, these are really great questions, and this could be a whole, separate panel just on male fertility. But I do think, the hardest part has probably been maybe less about the science, but more about changing that cultural narrative around fertility, and then how to have or present that science in a way that actually speaks to men. So, like you said, the evidence has shown for a long time that men are factors or male factors in nearly half of all infertility cases. So, but culturally, we still see fertility still very much framed as something that women manage or women
Mhm.
deal with and as a women's issue. Women are often the ones still doing all of the research, looking at supplements, making appointments, tracking cycles, trying to figure out everything that they can do, and really, too, carrying that emotional load. So, the science has really given us, confidence in entering this category. But then the harder part is kind of, as you alluded to, maybe translating that science into messaging that men actually hear. The challenge is making that conversation feel really relevant to them, without maybe being overly clinical sounding or potentially shame based, where they feel like they're failing us in some way. We really want to help make the connection between their fertility health with health outcomes that they already care about. So, things like their energy levels or performance, their hormone health or sexual function, and also then their long-term health span. Those are topics that really men are more aware of or perceptive to. So, how do we kind of close that education gap a little bit, where we, let men know that these are all indicators um, of their sperm health that is reflected in this 3 month window where we have so much opportunity to really influence their sperm parameters, and how that actually then down the road is impacting long-term health. So a lot of them don't recognize that things like sleep or nutrition
Mhm.
or alcohol consumption, or even we're seeing with cannabis use, or everyone loves a sauna, but is heat
Mhm.
exposure negatively impacting male fertility? So, a lot of it is just giving men a meaningful role in this and showing them that their health matters in this equation too. We're not asking them to take over the fertility conversation, but really inviting them in to a conversation that we can all have together.
Yeah, to be part of it, right?
Yes.
Um, And Alexander, you mentioned there's a lot of confusion around perimenopause, and I agree, because even doctors sometimes get it wrong, right? They are using the words perimenopause and menopause kind of interchangeably. Can you tell us what's the actual difference, and why does that distinction matter in terms of how a woman is treated?
Of course, I think it's a very simple distinction. Menopause is an event or a day for some people. It's 12 months without a menstrual period. Perimenopause is everything going on with your hormones leading up to that time point. Now, I think it's a really important distinction for doctors, for a man like myself to understand. But for a woman going through it, I don't think the distinction is that necessary. I think it's a problem solution. How can we help here? For many years, you said in the first question that perimenopause was having a moment, and it certainly is. And I think a lot of the supplements that have come beforehand from some great companies making great products use the word menopause instead of perimenopause because it was the word that consumers were familiar with. And now we're at a point where consumers, specifically female consumers, are very well educated. They're very well informed. So again, it's about meeting them where they're at and meeting them. They're learning about perimenopause. It's becoming more of a conversation. Spoke to somebody the other day who referred to finally talking about perimenopause is coming out of the closet about perimenopause. It's a hard conversation to have. It's admitting, like any of us at any point, that we're getting a little bit older. So the distinction is important, but I think the understanding of what the consumer is going through is the most important. So it's diagnosed differently. It's a lot easier to diagnose, menopause and postmenopause than perimenopause. There are labs that can be done, but it's diagnosed symptomatically. And sometimes it might be your OBGYN, it might be your internist. There are certain doctors that will help diagnose you better than others, and it's good because it's often misdiagnosed. Some things can be an anxiety disorder could be misdiagnosed as perimenopause and vice versa. And so you hear a lot of doctors getting patients off of SSRIs because they've been misdiagnosed with having one problem that is perimenopause and the other. So the unbelievable amount of information out there can be super misleading. So I think one day is our menopause day, and everything up to that is peri, and everybody goes through it differently. There are some people you speak to who have never had a hot flash, one that had one, and it was unbelievable, and they'll never forget it. There are some that gain weight, some that don't, some that suffer anxiety, which is the thing we kind of hear the most when we talk to our friends and our consumers that we're working with to build is that's the kind of number one thing we hear about, often referred to now as overwhelm. Things have changed. You used to be able to drop your cell phone, be annoyed that the screen broke, and now it's drop the cell phone and you're overwhelmed. You might cry. Something might change, and recognizing that these changes are happening. And important, to what you said about the distinction, is preparing people before they get to this phase of life to know what's coming and not be afraid of it and not be surprised by it. To know that these changes are natural. They're almost healthy because it's going to happen to everybody. If you are lucky enough to live to this particular age, it will happen. And it's not anybody's fault. It's not a fault of your diet. It's not about getting 10,000 steps. It's not about lifting heavier weights, as everybody likes to talk about. It's going to happen to you no matter what. And so it's good to educate and it's good to understand this distinction. And I think the more we talk about it and the more it becomes part of the conversation, hopefully the more comfortable people get and they start to seek out, okay, what is this? What is that? It's different from what how our parents saw it. Our parents' generation didn't speak about perimenopause. They spoke about menopause, but not peri. And it's really come to the forefront of conversation. You said earlier 2 years, 2 years versus 6 months ago, the difference is vast. It's more and more and more and more. But with that information comes, as you said, misinformation. So it's about talking to your doctors, talking to friends, taking the time to learn to the best that you can.
And let me ask you a follow-up question. So there are often many symptoms women are fighting with, right? You mentioned a bunch, right? Hot flashes, right? Drops in energy, often also issues with sleep, drops in libido, mood swings. And how do you handle these different symptoms as a brand? Is it one product to help with everything? Is it a line? Can you walk us through how you think about that?
Of course, our initial launch is two SKUs, but one product really. It's an AM and a PM. They're stick packs of drinks, and they're formulated in a very specific way to work harmoniously. So our approach to it, and before I get there, after that, we'll be offering what we're going to call advanced solutions. So something targeted for hot flashes, and then something targeted for people who want something for hot flashes but are maybe hesitant to take a phytoestrogen. We have products for urinary symptoms. We have more targeted approaches, but our main approach is different than what's out there now, because a lot of brands are chasing the individual symptoms alone. They'll throw off to the side, okay, we've come out with a hot flash relief, we've come out with a sleep relief. We're trying to address the interconnected biological symptoms that drive the whole experience. Understanding why certain things happen. Thara was talking about cortisol. Cortisol plays a big role in it. The drop in estrogen and the fluctuations in hormones lead to so many different interconnected problems. If someone generally says, oh, the best way to reset cortisol is to get more sleep. Well, what happens if you can't sleep? What happens if you're having severe sleep disturbances? So we're trying to address every step of that. The sleep disturbances, you can't reset this HPA axis unless you're getting sleep. But if you can't sleep, we need to figure out why. It may be because when estrogen drops, GABA production goes down. So let's bring in some L-theanine to help with GABA production and break through the blood-brain barrier. So what we're trying to do initially, and hoping to do, is cover as many symptoms as possible in a very scientific way, backing it with clinicals, having everything at a clinical dose, making sure that we're understanding why certain things happen, why insulin resistance happens as estrogen drops, why visceral fat increases, why hot flashes. There's multiple reasons. It's oftentimes a blood sugar response for night sweats versus daytime hot flashes. So it's about learning how our consumer faces these things and what we can do to help. So it will start with a general approach, and as we move forward, lined up, we have more targeted, specific, because like I said, there are people who do not have hot flashes, so then they don't need to take the hot flash product. There are people that do not have sleep problems, so they don't need to take the sleep specific product. The people without general urinary problems, so they stay away from that. So as we approach all of our consumers at once, then we'll roll out things for each one specifically for what they need.
That's fantastic. And I would also like to get to the other side of this spectrum now with Reagan. Um, with WeNatal, you coined the term trimester zero, which is this preconception window. And can you explain this concept? Because I think a lot of couples who are trying to get pregnant are forgetting about that.
Absolutely. And maybe it's not necessarily forgetting, but don't know that it even exists. So trimester zero is a term coined by one of our medical advisors, and it's looking at the period of time before pregnancy where both partners can really work on supporting their overall health and laying a good foundation for preparing for conception. So we often focus so much on pregnancy itself that we forget pregnancy begins with a healthy egg and healthy sperm and the environment in which conception occurs. So for women, it means trying to optimize nutrient stores, supporting their metabolic health, addressing any underlying deficiencies that have maybe been missed, and establishing habits that are going to then carry them on through pregnancy, and hopefully make for a smoother journey there. For men, it's, especially relevant because sperm develop over roughly 74 days, with a little additional time there for the maturing process. But it really makes this 3-month window of time before conception a meaningful opportunity to really optimize nutrition and lifestyle practices that are going to help support outcomes. So, for male partners, I frequently and, kind of lightheartedly, but still seriously say, let's look at this as if we're training like Olympic athletes. It really resonates with them. It's this window of time where we can really dial in, focus on optimizing health, but it doesn't feel overwhelming in that it's this short window of time that we can really have a significant impact. So, even though as a practitioner, I often see these lifestyle or behavior changes go longer beyond that conception time. And so for me, that's a huge win to see those really integrated into somebody's lifestyle. But what I love about the concept of trimester zero is that it really shifts preconception away from anxiety and perfection. And it's not about trying to control the outcomes, because we have control over certain things, but not all things. And so it's really trying to help people recognize that small, consistent choices that they're making can really build a very strong foundation for them.
And Sarah, I would be remiss not to ask you about your clinical study. And one thing I find fascinating about Hey Freya is that you got fantastic results on improvements in stress on a clinically validated anxiety scale. And I remember the day when we told you about the results, you were like, that's amazing. And we were like, we can't believe it. Like, this is so good. And yet you deliberately do not market this as like an anti-anxiety product, right? Can you walk us through that decision, how you sit on that data that is so strong and then choose that this is not the way, the direction you wanted to go?
Well, there are two reasons for that. So just to for people listening, the the clinical trial was on a product that was focused on supporting cortisol and their daily multivitamin plus the daily cortisol rhythm. And the outcomes of those were like Suzanne just said, was almost almost shocked us with how well it worked. And the on the clinically validated scale, it showed improvements in anxiety and levels of anxiety equivalent to what we would expect in first line anti-anxiety medications. And that is definitely worth shouting from the rooftops. However, there are two things to keep in mind when you have a brand that is public and consumer facing. Is one of those is medical claims. And so as
Mhm.
soon as, so this is really important just to know why a brand might also hold back, is one of those is anxiety is a clinical diagnosis. And so to then state that this product off the side is now going to solve the anxiety for millions of people across the nation, to claim that is grossly misguided, I would say. Is that yes, we can say that this is accurate. However, anxiety comes in many forms and is
Mhm.
managed through many different types of practitioners. It's so that's the one of the reasons. But I'd say the core reason from a inner inside of myself of why that also, even if we could claim it that way, is that anxiety is a sensation. It's a physical sensation in a person's body, and it's a mental process in someone's body, and it's representing the outcome of something going on. And if we turn our focus only to the outcome and not to the cause, we could end up, chasing the wrong solutions. And what I really liked in our study was to say that when you address cortisol, you are able to address anxiety. That's a whole different statement than this treats anxiety.
Mhm.
It's calling out that there is a cause that can be addressed outside of just bucketing everybody into generalized anxiety disorder. So taking the label off of the condition and saying, we don't want to market it as anti-anxiety. We want to market it as something that solves for the problem you're suffering with because we're addressing the cause.
That's
And
great.
yeah, and you'll see that across perimenopause, across all
Yeah.
these other solutions, is that even if the solution is it worked, your estrogen worked for anxiety, you don't market estrogen as an anti-anxiety medication.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
addressing the problem first.
And what you mentioned, right? There's a fine line also with health claims, what you can, what you can't claim when you enter the drug arena, like drug claim arena. This is typically when the regulators are watching, and we don't want to receive FTC letters, right? Or FDA letters even. That is always something to avoid.
Yeah.
And yeah, so to our audience, you heard it, the bar is rising in the women's health category. Consumers want real science, real evidence, and also want to be treated as the informed adults they are. And I also want to give our audience to ask our amazing panel some questions. So please type in your questions into the Q&A box. And I'm seeing that we already have a bunch of questions. Ben, which question should we ask?
Let's see. Yeah, maybe for Dr. Thara, what's a marketing claim that you see brands overusing right now that really doesn't land with consumers anymore, if there's one that you can think of?
Uh, so it's a good question because there's landing with kind of emotionally, and then the ones that they're like, but then they're skeptical. So I think a big part is like weight loss claims. Uh,
Mm.
it lands. It sure lands. But I think that the consumers and the women in our world are becoming more and more skeptical. But so I think there's a balance there. However, I do think on the piece that things aren't quite landing like they used to, I think of it a little bit like phases of what our society is interested in or not.
Yep.
And I would almost imagine that because perimenopause and menopause is having its moment, I think that some of the focus on other important elements are starting to not land anymore because the feeling is, oh, well, the solution must be it must be perimenopause. It's not inflammation. It must be perimenopause. It's not my gut. And so I think that the solutions that are saying to focus on your gut health, or the solutions that are saying to focus on inflammation, they're not landing as well as they used to 10 years ago.
Yeah, I also like to think about like the entire industry kind of as fast fashion, right? Like what's trending, and you see a lot of especially bigger companies and quickly bringing out products, right? For example, I think 2 years ago it was like hair growth. Like everyone did a product on hair growth. Right now it's not that trendy anymore. Um, so we see less of it. Now it's like, but depending on what's happening end of this month, it will likely be peptides, right? Everyone will launch like a peptide. Um, but this is how I see it, similar to what Sarah said. And like there are like cycles in the industry. Um, great. Next question.
Yeah, maybe this one for Alexander. What's kind of the biggest thing, thinking about where you guys are at in your journey as a company? I'm sure a lot of other companies on the call right now are kind of in the same timeline. So, what's kind of the biggest thing that you've learned getting ready for launch that has surprised you?
That's a very good question because I've learned a lot of big things over the past year or so. Um, in a positive way, the thing that surprised me the most is having these really close relationships with our ingredient suppliers. As Thera said, the clinicals are important. Understanding what you can say regarding disease states in clinicals is really important. What you can bring to the consumer. So to build alongside with our suppliers with these unbelievable patented ingredients that sometimes have these mechanisms of action that might be a little too close to some excuse me, something that FDA or the FTC might keep their eye on, and building alongside them and having their support as you go. It's wonderful. You know, they often say, "Wow, you guys share a lot with us, a lot more than other companies do." Our goal is to build together because we want to make a difference and a change. So that's been a surprise to me because it's something I didn't really know existed. On the other side, there's a lot of surprise um, in getting the product to our co-man, getting it together, getting the design together, everything kind of bottlenecking and then coming at once. And we use also, back to what Thara said, we have a third-party claims review company that does everything from supplements to FDA claims, and learning a lot about what you can and can't say. And regarding Suzanne, your question about Sarah's test with anxiety, you know, you're limited in what you can say due to you don't want a letter from the FTC or the FDA, and that can maybe be a great thing because you can under promise and over deliver because you can say, okay, it improves your mood, anxiety, depression, their disease states. We as supplement makers can't talk about them. So it's really just learning, trying to absorb that knowledge and bring it on to the next phase.
There's also a question specifically on creatine. That's another good example. I think creatine, also as a supplement is also trending. Creatine is everywhere.
Quite a bit.
Yeah. So one question is, what creatine trials would you most like to see in women? Which populations, outcomes, or health areas should researchers prioritize? Who wants to take this? I also have an opinion.
I'll chime in on this one. I definitely would love to see there's so much coming out about cognitive function and things like that, especially for kind of that perimenopausal age group. So I think that would be a huge opportunity to really look at what the outcomes are and does it truly support cognitive function long term? Is it potentially, a band-aid, or does it have long-term impact there?
Yeah, specifically on women's health. Women have less creatine. We create less creatine because we have less muscle than men, and also typically we consume less creatine because women historically we are eating less meat. Where you would typically get creatine from. So supplementing with creatine actually makes sense as a woman. And I think also specifically with the perimenopause, menopause conversation, right there are some links, in terms of, obviously muscle strength, but also bone health. Which is very important as we age as women, which I would also throw in. Thara, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yes, I think this is like the laundry list of like what what we'd like to see. I also would like to see other studies in addition to what you said. But I think a piece that is becoming more and more obvious to women through perimenopause is the joints and the
Mhm.
nerves. And so similar to muscle and cognitive function is we know that it has an impact there. And so looking at more detailed studies on the mechanisms of action and efficacy of supplementing creatine on frozen shoulder, frozen ankles, ligament
Mhm.
tears. So not necessarily the inflammatory perspective, but on laxity and basically rigidity in the connective tissue. I'd like to see that.
Yeah,
And,
that's
and
a
kind of like those two nerve pain and ligament strength and flexibility.
that's a really good one as well. All right, so let's do one more question. Um, and I like the one on trust. So for the skeptical user, what is one communication layer you think would help improve trust among them? Do you think companies need to be more open about limitations of their products rather than hide it behind regulatory hurdles? I think this is a really good question.
Can I take that one?
Yes, of course.
Start, Alexander, you take it after me. So I think one of the important pieces here is that we're recognizing that since 2024 and AI has shifted the conversation around how to trust and who to trust. I think one of the best things we can do is show the human part behind what we're doing. And so whether that is being more transparent in our process or just showing up to panels, doing things where people can see that there are real people with clinical judgment and experience and research behind what's being built. And as an example on a website, the about us being just we love women, like that kind of immediately the trust drops. And I think that aside from, of course, there's lots of ways to put stamps on your website and have your figurehead doctor on the front. There's lots of ways you can do that. But I think for women, and what I've seen is that looks like it might help, but I think it's the human connection that actually builds trust. And so we build that in different ways. And so we have definitely recognized that too. We have massive databases of all the research that supports what we do. And that's nice, but it is not the trust building part. It is like additional that allows the person, once they've decided to trust, they feel more comfortable seeing that data. But that is not the way they begin trust.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's almost what I was about to say. It's that human element, letting people know that, as you said about the study you did with citrus in regards to being surprised by the results, to share that with the consumer and let them know this is what we did and this is how we got there, lets them into the story and how you got there and how much work got there. Just throwing out clinical data. Sure, it's good to read. It's wonderful. It backs up some statements and some claims you want to make. But it doesn't bring the consumer to a point where they feel like they can listen and they can trust you and understand that you came to this from a place that doesn't just say, yes, we love women, and I've got XYZ doctor here, and you have to trust them because they're on every other brand that you trust. And it's this repetition that we see across. I think what people thought at a time built trust is now getting consumers to stand back a little bit and say, wait, we've heard this before, we've seen this face before, and with AI, with consumers being more educated and more interested in knowing more, they're able to cut through the BS and say, oh, well, back to the creatine comment. There's been some great creatine studies, but if you read the clinical data, a lot of it says more studies need to be done at the bottom. You keep reading more and more and more. It's not decisive. And then you go on Instagram or TikTok, and there's a doctor there saying creatine is #1 for perimenopause. You got to take it. You got to take it. You got to take it. Then you go, okay, let me take a look at this study. You realize this study from 2012 that they're repurposing for content today because of a trending topic, and the trust is broken. So it's about trying to bring consumers in who are naturally skeptical, who are really looking for a solution. They're not there to just buy, to just experiment. And if you disappoint, if you underdeliver, if you overpromise and underdeliver, you lose the trust. It doesn't matter how good your clinicals are. It doesn't matter how cool your branding is or which doctors you have attached. So you gotta understand that while some things are buzzworthy and they're cool, if you're going to use strong actives, they should be at a clinical level. If you want to throw your clinicals up there, be honest, be transparent, and understand that your consumer is coming to you because they have a problem they need help with. They don't want to just be sold something.
And I know I mentioned that this would be the last one. There's actually one that I find very interesting that I think I quickly want to get into as well. And this is for Alexander, but if Raegen and Thara also have an opinion, please go ahead. And the question is around if what you think about partnering with insurance companies or doctors to then prescribe your product
Well,
to. So
there are.
how do you think about that? Yeah.
Listen, it's. I believe Thara could help me. It's category 2, I believe you would have to be in to get that done. There are regulatory hurdles to do that. Very big, very expensive, very long, very unnecessary hurdles to go through. I don't want to throw shade at anyone, but it's often just a very good marketing trick. If you have the money to get into category two, the doctor can write out a prescription for you, and you can then go take this supplement that everybody else can actually just buy on your website or at the Target or on Amazon. It'd be great if it was easier to approach this from a financial standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint. We are launching a suppository in the fall. We have to be very careful with just even calling it a suppository. The leader in that space for vaginal suppositories is registered under category two. They can have the same exact ingredients for us, but because they put more money towards it, they know the right people. Your doctor can write you a prescription for that and not for us, and you're therefore going to feel like it's a more valid product. So while there's great benefit to it, I think it's important for the consumer to understand that a prescription magnesium supplement at 400 milligrams, say it's magnesium bisglycinate, is probably not going to be any different from a non-prescription 400 milligram magnesium bisglycinate. So again, it's about being educated and understanding that, as Thara was saying earlier, as we've talked about with claims, we have to be careful with our claims language. This is very similar, if not even a little more tricky, because of the financial incentive that comes with it. So yes, would love it, but for now, probably not.
Yeah, and there are ways to work with insurance that have to do with kind of developing programs versus a specific supplement that they're willing to prescribe. So that's something else to think about if you're thinking of running a brand, is that if an insurance company can kind of show better outcomes from a program that's being developed, it's a little easier than all the hurdles that come with a product being essentially comparable to a prescription. So there are ways, but it is not always. It's still not easy to get in the ear of the insurance company to see that as a benefit.
And I would love to get that conversation going, but we are coming up on time. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And special thanks to Thara, Raegen, and Alexander for being so generous with their time. And before we go, please tell people where to find you and your brands. Thara, where should people go to learn more about Hey Freya and follow your work?
You can find us on our website at getheyfreya.com. So it's a lot of E's, getheyfreya.com. And we're on Instagram at getheyfreya. And so that is where you can find us. And if you search where you get your podcast, there's several episodes that I've been on talking about perimenopause, menopause, cortisol, periods. If you just search my name in your podcast app, you will find me. There's lots of information that can support your journey.
Great. And Raegen, how can people find WeNatal and find you?
So you can find us at WeNatal.com, and there are links to all social media platforms, as well as podcast links too. So definitely search within your podcast provider to see those as well. But our website is full of tons of education, practical tools to really make the fertility science very approachable and applicable. And you can find me throughout all of our guides and education channels along the way.
And Alexander, what about you?
Well, as you guys know, we're pre-launch, but we've worked quite hard to get our lander ready for this webinar. So we can be found at lmmeno.com, and we have a sign up, which naturally comes with a discount, but it will provide anyone who signs up with our ebook. And we're putting together an unbelievable ebook with a doctor who's a real leader in this category, has been in it for years. And we've been working with her since the very early days to review our formulation. So that'll be coming very soon. So Elemento.com. Still setting up socials, still setting up a lot of things pre-launch, but we've got the lander in, and send us your email and we'll send you what we have about our product, about perimenopause in general.
Fantastic. And if you work on the brand or science side of women's health and you care about getting the evidence right, that's what we do at Citruslabs. And you can find us at citruslabs.com or email us at hello@citruslabs.com. Well, thank you all so much for spending your time with us. And I hope you are walking away understanding these categories and the women in them a little bit better. And take care and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.